and welcome to Cut Through, Crikey's spin-free analysis of Australian news, politics and power. I'm your host, Crystal Andrews, and today I am joined by Crikey contributor and economist Jason Murphy to unpack the government's much-hyped Economic Roundtable this week. Jason, welcome to Cut Through. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
You write some of the most fun and interesting, thought-provoking economic pieces for Crikey, which is very, very high praise. So I'm super excited to talk to you about what could be a dry topic, but we're going to make it really interesting and engaging for people, aren't we?
We will do. I'll do my very best.
I know that you will, and that is why you are here. That's why we've chosen you. So we'll set the scene for everyone first. This week, Jim Chalmers has hosted his 3-day Economic Reform Roundtable at Parliament House, bringing together a group of experts, leaders and executives from a range of sectors to discuss the challenges facing the Australian economy. He has pitched this as his 3 days to shape the next 3 budgets project. So there's a lot that's been tackled, from trade to investment, housing, AI, competition, tax reform. They're covering a lot of ground. But the main overarching theme of all of this is productivity. And that is apparently the overarching challenge that Australia is facing right now. So Jason, maybe you can start us off with some fundamentals here. What is the productivity problem that Australia has and that this roundtable is kind of meant to explore?
Yeah, such a good question. I feel like productivity it has such a massive PR problem because it sounds like so dry it is almost going to kill you, but it is actually so important. Like, productivity is what is the reason that we have such incredibly high standards of living these days compared to in the past. It's basically about doing stuff more efficiently. So I've been working on a pitch to try to explain productivity to people for years, and this is a good opportunity to try it out.
You're the PR guy now for productivity.
Yeah,
this is the platform.
It really needs a brand makeover. I've spent a lot of time trying to come up with a better word, and I can't. But anyway, the idea is that basically we want to be able to put stuff together more efficiently, because economic growth is about creating more output, and you can do that in one of 2 ways. You can use more inputs, or you can use the inputs smarter and better. And using more inputs is costly. That's more hours at work, more land being dragged in, more capital, more everything. So that's one way we make a lot of economic growth like that. But the cool way, the fun way, the one that all the cool kids like, is doing stuff more efficiently. Because that allows us to grow the economy without necessarily using more inputs. And so I think, maybe this is one of the source of those big breakdowns between the economists and some of the degrowther types, is that economists know you can get economic growth without using more inputs. And the magic is productivity, which is just doing smarter stuff with your inputs. A really good example of a productivity increase would be like a water pipe. If you can free people from having to go and collect water and bring it back to their house, that's a great example of a type of technology that is incredibly productivity enhancing. You bring water to people's homes and their standard of living just shoots up through the time saving and the effort saving. And then they're also able to consume more water after that. And all of those things add together into this incredible improvement to their standard of living. If you think about all the little things that have been done in our society in terms of new technologies and stuff like that, they're all, the productivity enhancing ones will have something in common with that water pipe.
Right. So it's taking, I guess, individual, in this case, they're talking about sectors or maybe even individual businesses, and figuring out how do we get the thing that is produced by this sector or this business to be done more efficiently, freeing people up to then put their efforts elsewhere. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah. So that's definitely one of the aspects of it that people hate, and you got to accept it. Is that if you come up with ways to do things more efficiently, you're putting people out of a job. So you might be asking, where are the checkout operators that have all been displaced from the supermarket now that there's so many of those
automated self-serve trek-throughs.
Yeah. Unexpected item in the bagging area. And that is another really difficult downside of labour productivity, is that we get the creation and destruction rolling as a bit of a wave of replacement. And so the idea of the high productivity growth society is that it is creating higher and higher standards of living that can fund tax, that funds a safety net, but it doesn't actually guarantee to you that your job will remain the same across the course of your life. You're probably going to, at some point, retrain within an organization or change roles, or maybe even get retrenched and then have to look for a new job if your industry is one of the ones where they figure out a great new way to do things efficiently.
There is, I was having a look at some of the papers that are being used as the reference for the roundtable, and there's a line in one of them that says, even small movements in productivity growth will have large impacts on wages and living standards over time. So I think the living standards part, I can definitely understand with your analogy to the water pipes. But the wages part is where I and many others get tripped up in understanding what is that relationship between productivity and wages. I think for a lot of people, it's the part that matters to them, right? Like, what do I take home at the end of the day? Like, what does my bank balance and my own household budget look like? Is that relationship between the two, like, how does it work? And is it always a guaranteed relationship between those two?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So when we talk about productivity, you've got like total factor productivity where they worry about use of land and capital and everything. And you've got labor productivity, and that's the one that tracks generally with wages. It doesn't track one to one, and you can have periods where it lags behind growth in productivity, where the wages line can be kind of flat even when the productivity line is going up. But we generally think that in the long run, that gap will close again at a time of labour market tightness. The wages should leap up if you run unemployment pretty low. So I remain hopeful that that link is there, that our wages will go up. And it, like, if you've got a team of people digging a hole and they've all got spades, and then you go out and you buy them a huge yellow digger, you're going to need less people. But the one person that's driving that thing, that's driving the levers and digging that hole is going to be paid more, because they're producing the same output with less labor input. And so basically one of the ideas is that if you add more capital, in this case the big yellow machine, into the workplace, then the remaining workers there are producing more output per person and getting higher wages. And that sort of stacks up theoretically and empirically. If you look at the history of wages growth, it tracks increases in labor productivity. So I think we can be hopeful that relationship will stick around, and that if we really focus on lifting labor productivity, it will lift wages. And in fact, that's why Australia is one of the richest countries in the world, is that we are pretty productive. We can definitely get more productive.
There's a really good question we've been sent actually from one of our Crikey subscribers, Sarah, which I think also is another little piece to just understanding this thoroughly before we get into the roundtable itself. She asks about the underlying characteristics of an economy that promotes productivity. For an economy to be more productive, do we need the participants in that economy to be more insecure or more secure? What is it that we actually need it to look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that you will experiment and invent more and try to bring new ideas into the economy more if you're feeling more secure, and that there'll be more backlash against those ideas if people are insecure. So I think you do want that strong sense of community and social security and safety net. I think if you think about places in the world where they really resist the introduction of new ideas, it's because their livelihoods are genuinely threatened by that, and there's no hope of a backup plan. Whereas if we have a rich, complex, mixed economy with lots of different industries, even if there is some lower level of unemployment in one, you can hope that another industry is growing. And so I think that sense that this society is complex and wealthy and will always offer me an opportunity is something that will generate people that are trying new ideas. But yeah, there is that creative destruction element, where a highly productive economy is an economy that's changing, and their jobs are changing, and people might find their role that they did 20 years ago just doesn't exist anymore, and they need to go and move on and and try to find something else. And that is that's a challenge. I'm not going to whitewash that. I think that is a genuine reason for people to be a little bit concerned about how it might affect individuals. But the history of the aggregate says that we should all, on average, get better off from this.
And I suppose, that also is something that has happened in the past, the destruction of certain types of jobs or certain industries, the emergence and the evolution of new ones, and perhaps some of the thinking behind this roundtable summit is about understanding where those movements are happening and perhaps like shepherding where the energy kind of goes. And presenting that to people in a way that doesn't scare them, but makes them feel like, oh, the government's thinking about this and, has a plan going forward. We'll chat a little bit more later about how effective the politics of that might be. But maybe it's a good opportunity to talk about housing now as one of the main sort of topics that was discussed on day 2 of the roundtable. The framing of the housing issue at this session was really much around reducing red tape, with a particular focus on environmental regulation. Geraldine Slattery was in attendance. She's the BHP Australia president. So I will let readers and listeners figure out what they think the interpretation of the tenor of that discussion was. But how does housing plug into this productivity discussion? Because it does seem like this is, it's a really hot political topic at the moment. Obviously, this is where we live. It's really important and core to people's lives. But that's not really the role that's being discussed when it comes to productivity, right?
Yeah, so this is all about supply, like trying to make more houses, which I think there's a lot of back and forth on why house prices are high, but I think there's no one out there that doesn't think a bit more supply would be good. Some people think it's going to totally fix the problem. Other people are a bit cool on that, but I think everyone's like, yeah, let's at least just try and make some more. And the problem is that there's not too many tradies that are just out there not working. They're all flat out. And so we need to kind of find a way to make houses more efficiently. We need to find a way to put less hours into every new house so that we can get homes built for all these people that are that would like to have one, and there's a lot of them. And so how do we make houses more efficiently? How do we make them more productively so that more people can afford a place to live? And that one of the ideas that never dies is this idea of prefabricated homes. And it's very tempting, but that's a can that's been kicked down the road for like 30 years. Right near me, right around the corner, someone had a prefabricated home installed on their block. And this is an anecdote, this doesn't really scale, but the crane was lifting the prefabricated home into place when the crane fell over.
Oh God!
Crushed the house next door.
Oh my God!
We ended up with like less than. We added one new home, but we also lost one, so that was a bit of a wash.
Wow, that is, yeah. Look, hopefully that's not an issue that scales across the country.
No, but it sort of goes to show that every block is kind of unique in terms of its aspect and its sunlight and its soil and its angle and where the street frontage is. And there's a reason that architects are so often used to try to design a house that suits the situation that it's in. There might be a massive tree or a tall house next door or whatever, and every block is different. So this idea of prefabricated homes is pretty it's very attractive in theory, and then I think if you sit in a little prefab home that's just dumped on a block with no thought to its surroundings, then it's not so good. So yeah, this is just such a challenging question, the question of how to make homes more efficiently. And I think anyone that sells the idea that they've got the one fix that's going to fix supply, that it's all about negative gearing, or it's all about capital gains tax, or it's all about prefab homes and we should all live in little dongers on a little foundation out in the greenfield sites. I think all of those are not true, but probably if we throw together a bunch of ideas, we can, move 5% in the right direction each year.
Yeah. And is it like, am I correct in understanding that that's like kind of both about the construction industry as a significant part of Australia's economy, and then also the living standards aspect for like the individual, and the fact that there is a well-priced, high-quality house for you to buy and for you to or rent and live in? Is it trying to address both aspects of that, or is it more one rather than the other?
My sense is that that ultimately, in this case, we're really concerned about the consumption of what people are consuming. It's like,
right,
in the pipe analogy, this is really about the water, not the pipe industry.
Yeah.
But yeah, construction is a massive part of our economy, and we would make the make the earnings of that industry go up if they could pump out more houses. If every plumber could finish 200 houses a year instead of 150, that'd be great for the plumber and their family, as well as for the people that get to live in those homes. But there's so many interdependencies with just land supply and zoning, and people complaining about tall towers and all that sort of stuff. I've got a backyard. A little bit of sun gets into it at certain times of year, and I really love that. I identify as a YIMBY pretty hard. I'm pro development, but I understand also the perspective of people that are, pushing back on it.
Yeah, I mean, the environmental regulations, as I kind of mentioned in the initial question, like that has been made to be, I don't know if it's just in, I think some of the media framing, it's been made to be like a focus of what's holding up housing supply. But this isn't just one issue of like, oh, if we, sort out the environmental regulations that prevent like developers accessing certain sites, that's the unlock, and then we'll have an incredible influx of housing supply. Like that just doesn't seem to track to me.
That doesn't make any sense whatsoever to me.
No.
Yeah, I think that's what sort of words are we allowed to use on this podcast?
Any words you like.
Yeah, that's bullshit.
Yeah. You can say bullshit on the Crikey podcast. Confirmed. If you could curate that housing section of this agenda, what would you put the focus on, or who would you have as like the person who's got great ideas on that?
Yeah, I guess I'm a real fan of building more density around our existing transport assets. So yeah, just relaxing some of those laws and speeding up some of the processes around city train stations, identifying parts of the big cities where you can go up to 8 stories along the tram lines in Melbourne, 10 stories around the train stations in Sydney, that sort of thing. I think that's a way to get housing into the places where it's most valuable. And the people that live in those areas are going to get a massive benefit from that. Like my mum has lived in this area where they've done a bunch of high density development, and all of a sudden her street has gone from having kind of like not that many services in it to having like a bunch of cafes, a Woolworths Metro, and all this cool stuff around. And they're going to bring more public transport into the area now because there's got more density and more people around there, and it's more of a destination. So I think, that kind of uplifting the density of those areas is helpful. Sliding the slider along a few percent, it's not going to create a house for everyone that wants one and drop property prices to 300K in the big cities, but you've got to take the wins you can get, and that's one that I think has spillover benefits as well in terms of reducing the amount of travel that needs to happen and getting people off the roads a bit, and getting them onto bikes and trains and walking in more sustainable modes, because I think that that's really a massive issue in our cities.
Yeah, getting those walkable communities. I'm all about that. We should do an episode on that. Actually, it would be a great one. Maybe we'll have you back for that. Another big topic of this roundtable is tax reform, tackled on the final day of the summit. And this is another conversation that has been in the political discourse for a long time. Having something substantial on this has felt like a long time coming. People like Allegra Spender been very vocal about this. The Greens have put ideas out there. David Pocock. I mean, many of the crossbenchers have put forward their own ideas about how we can address the inequities in the existing tax system. Jason, I would love to know from your perspective, who do you think has good ideas in this area? And, if readers and listeners are thinking, who should I listen to talk about this? Who would it be for you?
Yeah, the ideas are beautiful, but I would argue that the beauty of the idea is probably a distraction. That some of the ideas out of people like Allegra Spender seem sound. I'm a big fan of Danielle Wood at the Productivity Commission. I think that they've got ideas. And you go back to the Henry Tax Review, which came out while I was still at Treasury. There are some beautiful ideas in there. But what we've learned, I think, is that just because an idea looks like this pristine theoretical masterpiece does not mean that it has any truck with the Australian public. Like, I think we've seen that time and time again, that the government drags this thing out that the economists are in love with, and the people just set to work beating it with a stick. So my view is that probably in many cases tax reform is a lemon that has had all the accessible juice squeezed out of it. To some extent, we're probably sort of fighting the last battle when we talk about tax reform. That was how we got some productivity reform out of the economy in the past. And so people keep wanting to go back to that. But I feel as though people are tired of tax reform. The government's sort of de facto ruled out a bunch of things. And I'm not sure that we're going to make huge progress by pursuing this path that has burned us again.
Interesting. So you think this is like off the table? I mean, why are they talking about it at the roundtable then?
Because the tax system hits every business in the country. It's such a long lever that even if you can only do one little thing, you can create potentially these are incredibly wide-ranging effects that hit all kinds of businesses. So I understand the attraction there, but I think that that the lever is long, but your ability to use it is very, very limited because the popular backlash can be really extreme and can bring down a government, as Kevin Rudd found out the hard way with the mineral resource rent tax, which was just a thing that it brings a tear to my eye to think of the theoretical beauty of that tax and how good it was to tax these big companies on their super profits, and it just didn't fly. So I suppose I'm a bit burned by that, and I think Chalmers is burned by that. And realistically, he's not going to aim for anything too big. Maybe we'll tweak a few little things. I'd be very surprised if they brought in Allegra Spender's idea of indexing the income tax thresholds. That, to me, that actually isn't a good idea because you want to be able to vary those. Governments love to let them go up so they can refill the budget and then slash them so that they can win the next election. And I think that that's actually a potentially useful dynamic to have. It allows the government to tax more at some times and less at others if they don't index the thresholds. So I suspect that won't change. And the GST is off the table probably from a political perspective. And some changes to company tax. They could tweak that at the margins, but it's all a bit. I don't think that's going to make a massive difference to how companies run their operations in Australia.
And so I guess you're saying that it's like really the politics of these ideas that's going to stop anything from eventuating rather than the merit of the ideas themselves.
Yeah, to some extent, and we've hit the big ones that were possible to do, a long time ago, and now we're talking about a handful of nuisance tariffs instead of major tariff reform. So let's get rid of the nuisance tariffs, but I don't think this is, a huge area. But I do still think there are huge areas where we can improve the economy as long as we are willing to think about the economy as more than just the tax system. I think there's things that we can do.
I mean, what would you throw out there as one of those areas of attention?
Yeah, well, my bugbear is, I suppose, interface between the government and the people, which is often not a market interaction. It's not like when we interface with Woolworths or whatever and they're interested in keeping us happy. Like when you interface with the government, it can be really difficult. And in particular, Centrelink, I think the amount of time people are spending waiting on the phone and the challenges people have at meeting all the compliance rules are absolutely insane. And the amount of time that is being sucked out of the Australian community into dealing with this is shocking. It's shocking to me. And I think that if you take that sort of different perspective on what the economy is, that it includes the government and it includes the time of these people that is being dragged into dealing with these stupid systems, you can potentially find a dial that you can turn to actually free up a lot of time and make the economy a more productive place using things that are actually quite easy to directly control. And it requires thinking about productivity a little bit differently to how we've thought about it in the past. But yeah, that fits in with my previous argument that we have actually made some productivity gains in the past, and then we've been beating our heads against a brick wall trying to fix the tax system and eke the last couple of percent out of that. But actually, we'd be better off dealing with these other types of issues, such as the interface with Centrelink. It's really, I think people probably don't appreciate the scale of that and the amount of time millions of Australians are spending battling those systems, whereas the systems should be helping them. And then the other massive one, and this is hard, is just the use of space in our cities and on the roads. Most of those roads are, again, just provided for free and people are able to use them, and they are so busy and it slows everyone down. I really think that there's opportunities for us to get involved in that interaction and make those spaces work really, really, really well by helping some people move their travel to different times of day or to different places, or in ways that make our road system operate, properly, so it doesn't take an hour to get where you're going.
I'm sure that anyone who has ever had to deal with Centrelink would agree that there is huge opportunity for improvement there.
Yeah, there are people in the system, I think, that imagine that making it hard to deal with is rationing the use of it, but I think the money that they might be saving on the benefits is more than lost in the time of the people that is spent dealing with it. I did a survey a few years ago, like an informal survey of what people would fix if they had just one thing they could fix in the Australian economy, and I framed it like that because I was trying to not use the P word, productivity, and just everyone that came at me was talking about government regulated services, like dealing with councils, dealing with the tax system, and just the number one by a million miles was dealing with Centrelink. And and it helped me come to this realization that we need to think about every organisation in the economy, not just the private sector and not just the tax paying type organisations. We need to think about things like Centrelink and the amount of time of the people that are collecting payments and people that are helping those people that are collecting payments, whether they're paid or unpaid. We could help all those people do that part of their job much more efficiently and not spend 4 hours on the phone. It would just be this giant sigh of relief for the Australian economy, and we could put our time into other things like work or free time.
Or fun, or podcasts.
Yeah, listen to more podcasts.
More podcasts. No, I'm not sure that I would advocate that. Look, I want to end looking back a little bit, because I think it was June, you wrote a really great piece for Crikey about this productivity summit and feelings that you had about it, the hopes that you had for it. But I think that the takeaway of that was that even though you were trying to view it optimistically, that you didn't necessarily believe that it was going to have the outcomes that maybe people would expect. And certainly Jim Chalmers this week has, I think, tried to warn people to not expect imminent announcements following this of like policies that they're going to implement or things that we'll be seeing in the next budget, which does make it kind of hard in some respects to judge all this as a political exercise. How do you think that we could judge this summit as a success or a failure, like whether or not it had actually been worthwhile? Big question.
That is a huge question. I think that the existence of the summit is gutless and terrible. That, after the second time you're elected, you try to come up with a policy agenda. That's wrong. You should have your policy agenda there for us to vote on, not try to make one up after winning a stonking big victory. But that's maximally cynical.
And it's almost like too late, right? It's not only too late for me doing this, but in some sense it's too late for you to have that opinion because it's the decision that they made, right?
Yeah, you're 100% right about that. You just kind of got to be like a public servant, be like, wow, the government's done something really stupid. How can we make the best out of this? And so a public servant would be like, yeah, well, let's see what ideas we can get out of it. And the thing is, I suppose, is they can surface an idea now that then bubbles along in the background and everyone knows it's a good idea. And then there's a crisis. And at that time of crisis, they're desperate for something. And then they pluck this idea that was popular at the round table out of obscurity and install it. And I think that's one of the problems that this summit has, is a lack of a sense of crisis, is that there's not an impetus to solve anything. Like we talked about this at the start, people do not perceive Australia's low productivity growth situation as a crisis. We've got low unemployment. We've still got relatively high wages. Those things are not improving very quickly, but they're both good positions to be in. So we're not in a stage of crisis, and I suspect that the way to judge this summit will be to be looking back in 15 years and be like, two of the ideas that came out of that summit then later got put in place, perhaps by a government, another government, the next coalition government or the Labor government after that might put some of them into place, and then we'll be able to say, aha, that one summit back in 2025 made a difference.
Wow, that's a pretty potentially like a grim outlook for Chalmers, who I think wants this to be seen as him as a kind of visionary. And that might sound to people like I mean it in a derogatory sense or something, but I don't. But, it definitely seems to be that he wants an image of saying like, there are problems that we need to solve. And so let's get everybody together and I'll be the person and we'll be the government that brings the people together to throw the ideas around. This is what people want to see more of. To have to wait potentially 10 years for any of this to come to fruition it's a long wait.
Yeah, if he would like to be seen as a visionary, I would recommend to him having a vision rather than a committee meeting.
That is as good of a final line as I'm going to get for this podcast. So I'm going to leave it there. Jason, thank you so much for giving me your time today, and we'll definitely have you back on Cut Through at another point in the future.
Thanks so much, Crystal.
If you're listening to us on a podcast app, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review Cut Through. And if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel. It all helps Crikey grow and gets our independent journalism out to more people. That's all for now. We'll be back next week.